The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Manfromleng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are kicking off our review of the player cards in the Dunwich Legacy Investigator Expansion for the benefit of new players. We're going to start things off with the Guardian cards. This is part 1 of a 4-part series. In this episode, we're going to take a look at Bandolier, Blackjack, If It Bleeds, Emergency Aid, and Prepared for the Worst. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Just a quick reminder of how we rate cards here on The Whisper in Darkness. The best of the best get an Elder Sign, while the worst of the worst get an Auto Fail, and the cards in between get a +1, 0, or Elder Thing respectively. Cards that you build around or are good in one particular deck get a Bless token, while cards we believe are destined for the list of taboos or are simply bad for the game get a Curse token. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these player card reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your reward. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Cole Monroe Tritty for the amazing art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiscus for the new Whisper in Darkness logo that I use for the podcast, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. We are back with another batch of reviews. This time around, we are going to take a look at the cards in the Dunwich Legacy. It was recently repackaged by FFG in a similar format to the Edge of the Earth. So you have the Dunwich Legacy Investigator Expansion as well as the Dunwich Legacy Campaign Expansion. We are going to approach the Dunwich Legacy in a similar way to what we did from the revised core set. We're going to take a look at these cards primarily from the perspective of a new player. Perhaps you picked up the revised core and you are looking to play the campaigns in order, and so you have gone out and picked yourself up the Dunwich Legacy. We're going to talk a little bit about what you can expect, how these cards fit in with their revised core set counterparts, and we'll also touch on how these cards have aged over the past, at this point, 5 or 6 years since the Dunwich Legacy was released. We are going to use the traditional rating system that we used for the Edge of the Earth. We're going to kick things off with Bandolier. It is a 2-cost asset that has a combat skill icon item trait. You have 1 additional hand slot, which can only be used to hold a weapon asset. It has 1 health and takes up the body slot. So extra hand slots are very hard to come by, even to this day. There is not much competition for the body slot in either the revised core set or the Return to the or the Dunwich Legacy. There is a level 2 upgrade in the Return to the Dunwich Legacy, which is actually quite nice. It gives you a willpower, extra willpower if you are armed with a 2-handed weapon. What do we think about Bandolier?
I like this card quite a bit, actually. I think for what it does, it's unrivaled. Like you were saying, still aren't a lot of cards that add extra hand slots, and this is pretty much the only way Guardians have to get extra hand slots, and it's pretty good. It does provide a point of soak, worst comes to worst, too. So if you're at the end of a scenario and you don't need that extra hand slot for whatever reason, you can just pitch this for an extra point of damage, which is nice.
Yeah, that's true. Body slots are few and far between. You've got this. You've got fine clothes later in this cycle here. You've got leather coat from the core for survivor. So I think what the Bandolier kind of lets you do is it lets you, if you're playing Roland Banks, you can have a gun, you can have a magnifying glass, and you can have another gun or another magnifying glass. Kind of smooths that out.
It does let you play a card that we'll talk about in a bit, personal favorite of mine, along with a flashlight, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, any 2-handed weapon. So Jenny might like this, for instance, because Jenny has her twin 45, so you can use the twin 45s in combination with Bandolier.
Yeah,
which is nice. So
for lockpicks, for example.
Yep.
Yeah. So like any class that like Juggles hand slots can make good use of this. Even like Rex Murphy could use this to get an additional hand slot. I don't know exactly what he'd use it on, but I think the options are there. Like if you really want Rex Murphy to be able to use machete, he could have like a magnifying glass, a flashlight, and a machete with this. Yeah, so I think it opens up some options just to smooth things out.
Yeah, or even just double magnifying glass in a weapon.
Yeah, there you go. 45 automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say that I've included Bandolier in many a Guardian deck, primarily if I'm using, in solo anyway, if I'm playing, say, a weapon that requires two hands and I want to include a way to investigate like a flashlight or a magnifying glass or something like that. Bandolier is quite helpful in that regard. I have to say, while I've included it in a lot of decks, I'm not entirely sure how often I have been able to play it, though. It is somewhat awkward compared to some of the other cards that give slots, because those cards are permanent, so they start the game in play on the table. Bandolier, you've got to go find it, which in Guardian is not easy at this stage of the game. Guardians do not have a lot of card draw between the revised core and the Dunwich Legacy. There is really only one card that draws them cards, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later in Taunt level 2. But so I find that sometimes you end up in these very awkward situations, especially if you're playing a two-handed weapon where it's like, okay, I've drawn my two-handed weapon and my magnifying glass. Which do I play first? And you're forced to choose one and then hope that you draw your Bandolier sooner than later in order to play the other. And sometimes that choice is obvious. Say there's enemies on the table and you need to kill them. Obviously you play the weapon. Or you say, okay, well, I'm gonna there's no enemies right now, so I'm gonna play the flashlight. Maybe wait till I draw another one-handed weapon or the two-handed weapon and then see. And then, of course, you draw the one-handed weapon. So now the Bandolier is kind of like, well, I don't really need the Bandolier anymore. Mm-hmm. I've got a weapon and my flashlight. I guess I'll go without the two-handed weapon this time around. So it's not really a knock against the card so much as just you can sometimes end up in these awkward spots where you need things to come out sort of in the right order in order for you to get for things to line up properly. So if you can get around that, then I mean, hand slots are hard to get, and this gives you one, so that's great. But man, many times I wish this had been a permanent, similar to Relic Hunter or Charisma or something like that, so you could dispense with all that concern about cards coming out at the right time and you just have a hand slot. I think the fact that it can only hold weapons is a pretty important restriction as it is. So I don't feel like if they had made this a permanent, like maybe even just take away the health on it, just make it a permanent that takes up a body slot and deals with weapons. I don't think that would have been overpowered, but who knows?
I'd pay 3 XP for that in Guardian. If it was Guardian only, that'd be a nice little class feature of the Guardians, is the ability to spend 3 XP to have an additional hand slot.
So in terms of longevity, really, Bandolier continues to be really one of the few ways you can add hand slots. So picking up this box for this card, you're going to be playing Bandolier right up till present day. So it has held its value in that respect. How would we rate this one?
I'm kind of torn between a 0 and a +1. Or it's like it's not +1 worthy most of the time, probably practically all the time, but when you do draw it in those right circumstances, like you have the weapon, you have the flashlight and the Bandolier, you've got all those things ticking, like you become a monster with a really powerful weapon and you're able to get clues. That's really all you can ask for. I think as far as a rating goes, I'm going to give it a 0. Simply because I think this is a card you really only play one of, for precisely the reason that you had described earlier, Manfromleng, where you draw the weapon but not the Bandolier, or you draw the Bandolier but not the other item. So Yeah, it's just kind of an awkward card,
Hmm.
and it's really never a card you can rely on having. Simply at this stage in the game, there's just isn't enough ways to get it out in the field reliably.
Yeah, I think it's a 0 as well. I think the fact that it smooths out a deck build that includes, like, say, Roland Banks, 4 or 5 guns, 2 flashlights, 2 magnifying glasses. I think Bandolier fits right in there because if he's working with 9 or 10 hand slot items, all of which are strong and all of which are solid, and then you've got the Bandolier to kind of, even things out a bit. I think the issue of needing things to come out in the correct order only really is nasty when you're doing a two-handed weapon. If you're doing like a series of one-handed items, I think the Bandolier just makes everything nice and smooth because you can have like a 45 automatic and a magnifying glass, and then you want to play a flashlight. Oh, you've got the Bandolier, and then you can now have all three. And then I think it's much more smooth, and you're not so much relying on things to come out in the right order. Yeah, I'd say it's a 0. It does what it does.
I was torn between a +1 and a 0 as well, because I feel like this is the type of effect that Guardians want and would include in a deck if it just did a little bit more. If it resolved the whole timing issue, I would have no problem giving this a +1. But as it stands in a class that doesn't have access to draw all that easily, especially if you're like, okay, if you're playing Roland Banks, he has access to Seeker, so he does have access to some draw there. Zoe Samaras, the other Guardian who is in the Dunwich Legacy, sort of has to. She only has 5 cards, so she could dip into Seeker for draw if necessary.
Yep.
But I feel like she has better options in some of the other classes. So yeah, if it just wasn't as awkward as it is, I would be willing to go +1. But as it stands, I think it has to go 0. The other sort of awkward situation you can end up in with this is when you do have your two-handed weapon and say your flashlight on the table, and then you've got to take that point of damage, and then you're kind of like, oh great, now I'm losing my Bandolier and something else, which never feels great. So
Yeah, I was gonna say there's another issue too, and that's just Guardians are always tight on resources. So your 45 automatic costs you 4, your flashlight costs you 2, and that's already 6 resources. And then Bandolier would put you up to 8, and then whatever else would be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 resources. So like that's a lot of resources. You're often probably not going to be able to generate that amount of resources without the help of emergency cash or rogue cards if you're playing skids. So, yeah, I think the other issue just becomes not only do I draw it, but do I have the time and the money to play it?
yeah, and I think, given the choice between, this doesn't advance the board state like your weapon or your flashlight or magnifying glass does. This is of the stuff you want on the board, this is more of a luxury. And so I think if you're short on resources, this is the thing you're going to draw and be like, well, I can't afford to play it, so I'm going to commit it to something down the road. The next card that we are going to look at is Blackjack. It is a 1-cost asset that has a combat skill icon, the item, weapon, and melee traits. As an action, you may fight. You get +1 combat for this attack. If you perform this attack against an enemy engaged with another investigator and you fail, you deal no damage. Blackjack takes up a hand slot. So, Blackjack feels to me like a card that they looked at Knife and said, how can we make Knife objectively worse? And the result is Blackjack, because it really doesn't do anything most of the time. I have seen investigators get hit by other investigators, and I have seen that derail a campaign. When an investigator got hit by an attack they weren't expecting, that investigator died, and it basically derailed the entire campaign going forward. Now, that is a situation that can happen. This is not the card that fixes that problem, though. Yep. This just feels like there is an upgrade for this. There is a level 2 upgrade in the Return to the Dunwich Legacy box that does better, but +1 combat, no damage bonus, basically blank, unless, most of the time, if you're attacking another investigator, people tend to be pretty risk averse, so they boost that attack as high as they can. So really the only token that can kill you is an auto fail. So this just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I would say 11 times out of 10, just play Overpower instead.
Or 100%. Or knife.
Or
play
knife. And the action that you would have spent playing the Blackjack, take that action, bank it, and take the engage action instead. And then, no problem. Then missing doesn't cause anyone to take damage.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Don't play the Blackjack, just take an engage action, and you've solved the problem without spending a resource and a card to do it.
And the investigator in the box likes to engage enemies.
That is
this
true.
Is all true. Yeah.
Zoe Samaras gets a resource every time she engages an enemy, so
just engage the thing.
just do the engagement. So, long story short, we're basically telling you not to play Blackjack. Do not play this card. It is not good. It gets an auto fail. In fact, this could be like the poster child for auto fails. A card that just essentially does nothing most of the time.
Yeah, not only that, but we can look at it as a poster child for an auto fail for what we would call a bad card. In that, so it doesn't actually help you at all. All it does is help you not fail as badly, and that card slot could be a zillion other things that help you not fail the test at all. Like we were saying, Overpower. Just play Overpower instead. Survivor is very good for this. Lucky, Live and Learn. These are all cards that help you not fail. Well, help you after you've drawn a bad token and you fail. See, Blackjack, it just doesn't do anything. All it does is negate the cost of failure, so instead just don't fail the test. Mm-hmm. And you don't need Blackjack. There are a few cards like this, and just don't play them.
And if you're thinking like Skids, right? Like Skids may want a cheap weapon, but he's got decent options once he upgrades into his rogue card pool, and you could just engage and evade, and then that's essentially problem solved for Skids. And Roland has guns, so I don't really even know if he would play Blackjack at all. When you could again just engage the enemy and solve that problem entirely.
Yeah, I think Blackjack might have been more interesting. We were talking before we started recording, maybe if it was just an item that you had that prevented your attacks if you failed from damaging the investigator. Now that would be interesting. Just as, it's going to cost you a hand slot, but if you are in one of those situations where you have no choice but to swing at an enemy engaged with another investigator, Blackjack has you covered. Some people might be willing to pay a resource for that sort of ability, but if you're swinging with Blackjack, you're going to do 1, maybe 2 damage as it is. So, unless your fellow investigator has really gotten beaten up over the course of a scenario, 1 damage shouldn't kill them. But
yeah, exactly.
So really, a card that does basically nothing is not something that you want to be putting in your deck.
Yeah, because this card was created to solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved at all.
And unfortunately, as your card pool expands, you will see several cards, several weapons. The Guardians seem to receive 1 or 2 every cycle, weapons that sort of try to do something and just kind of fall short in every regard, especially when you start to compare them to even just the basic weapons in the revised core set, or some of the upgrades that you start to see as the campaigns unfold. So this will not be the first time that you see a weapon that just kind of tries to solve a problem that does not exist. The next card is If It Bleeds. It is a 1-cost event that has a willpower and combat skill icon. It is fast. Play after you defeat a monster enemy. Each investigator at your location heals horror equal to that enemy's horror value. Now, the value of this card obviously improves potentially in multiplayer. If everybody's at one location, you happen to kill an enemy, a monster enemy, I should say, and everybody heals horror, that can potentially be quite good. Healing horror on every investigator is very nice. The thing I have to say about this card is that I took a peek at the revised core set and Dunwich Legacy card pool. There are 17 monster enemies between the two sets. The vast majority have horror values of 1. So if you dream of healing massive amounts of horror with this card, that is not going to happen. Most of the time, you're going to heal 1, and that's about it. What do you guys think about this one?
This gets a resounding for me.
Yeah. At least it's fast.
Yeah, at least it's fast. If it had 2 willpower icons,
oh yeah, there you go.
this would be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'd be like, okay, maybe I committed to Rotting Remains, or maybe I kill something and heal horror. Either one of those could be decent, but as it stands, this card is bleh.
Yeah, there's just aren't very many baddies that it's worth using on. Because
and it's
not a lot. Yeah,
and it's just not an effect that you need that often.
Yeah, it is similar to, say, the Guardian card Evidence from the core set, which, Evidence, you kill an enemy, any enemy, no restrictions there, you get a clue. That's valuable.
Yeah, because you pretty much always want clues.
Yeah, you always want clues. This one, it sort of assumes, okay, somebody has taken horror that you want to heal in the first place. As far as healing cards go, this is probably one of the less objectionable ones to me, simply because you are piggybacking that healing on something else. You do have to spend a card to do it, but at least you're not taking an action, which is where a lot of healing cards come up short for me. I guess, I don't know, to me, healing 1 horror, it just depends,
is it
right?
Worth a card slot?
You sort of need everything to line up. It's just like, okay, we're pushing toward the end of a scenario. We have everybody's sort of about to go insane. A monster enemy shows up. Oh, I killed it, and everybody heals the horror, so now we can press on and potentially defeat a scenario that we were in danger of losing. But there are only 17 monster enemies, but many of those enemies do appear in Dunwich Legacy scenarios. So, you will have a chance to use it if you're just playing the campaign. Whether the effect is something that you want, I think is the bigger question. And especially if you're only going to be getting 1 horror per investigator out of it. I think it's going to be tough to arrange that scenario where it's just like, haha, I've healed 4 horror. I just don't think that's going to happen all that often. How would we rate this one?
I'm going to give this a tentacle. Comparing this card to Evidence feels ugh.
Yeah.
It's like they do very similar things, but like you were saying, Manfromleng, Evidence doesn't have any restriction on what enemy you kill. And getting a clue is always good. Is there a time when that's bad? Maybe? Question mark. But I mean,
yeah. And Evidence has 2 of the same icon.
And Evidence has 2 matching icons, which is a thing that I always harp on. Is why don't cards like this that have niche use cases have matching icons? If this had 2 willpower skill icons, I'd be willing to bump this up almost to a 0. That's how much I value double icons. But as it stands, this is a tentacle. Don't play this.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. That being, it does have. I would run this over First Aid level 0 for sure. Like if gun to my head, I have to take some healing, I would run it over certain other things. Just the fact that it's fast. The alternative, playing Soak in the form of allies, is usually not fast, so at least it does that. But if it was just 2 horror, heal 2 horror, then I think it'd be fine. It might be fine. It might be worth playing. Fast, heal 2 horror. after you defeat an enemy seems fine. But the fact that the horror is variable and you got to like set it up and just tentacle.
I am going to give this one an elder thing simply because it actually does something. It will heal a horror in a pinch. I think it is like holding on to the elder thing by its fingernails, and if anybody just came along and breathed on it, it would fall into tentacle territory pretty quickly. You'd have to make a pretty good case for why you're playing this. Like, maybe you've played the campaign once already and you're like, okay, we need a little bit more oomph in the horde in the sanity department. Maybe pick this up. If you're really worried, but again, it's a level 0 card and I'm not paying experience for this. So this is a choice that you've got to make like at the beginning of a campaign. So I'm going to be generous and give it an elder thing because it will actually heal a horror if you defeat a monster enemy, but you need a really good reason to play this over some of the other Guardian cards that are available to you.
Mr. Lang up on healing? Is this a first, Nate?
It is actionless healing, though,
Yeah.
so let's not get carried away.
Oof. Speaking of actionless healing, what's next on the list here? Well, action full healing.
Action full healing. We have Emergency Aid. It is a 2-cost event that has an intellect and agility skill icon, insight and science trait. Choose an investigator at your location. Heal 2 damage from that investigator or from an ally asset he or she controls. So this will cost you an action and 2 resources in order to heal either an investigator or an ally. This, I believe, is the first card that we've seen that heals ally assets, of which there is a very important ally asset in the Dunwich Legacy, that being Ashcan Pete's signature ally, Duke. Healing damage from Beat Cops is, or especially
Nice.
Beat Cop level 2, is quite good. Gives you your healing 2 damage and able to convert that into more damage dealt against enemies. Not a huge fan of having to take an action to do it, but what do you guys think?
You've got Guard Dog as well.
Yeah.
So that's 2 allies that you could heal damage from and get more damage out of. I mean, it's essentially trading an action and 2 resources. If you're healing those allies specifically for 2 damage later on, which is pretty good. I mean, I'd be willing to pay a couple of resources and a card for that, I think.
Yeah. It also just works, and it can work on your friend,
Mm-hmm.
without having to set anything up. I'd play this over first aid all the time,
Mhm.
because it's 1 action, heal 2 damage. So like if you're in a multiplayer setting and like someone's really hurting, like that 2 damage can really help them along. I gotta admit, I like this over If It Bleeds because you don't have to set anything up.
Yeah, I do too. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it is slow. It
Mhm.
will at least do what it says it does when you play it,
Yeah.
and you're not relying on the encounter tech being in such a way and you killing an enemy and everyone
Mhm.
being at that location and blah 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 blah. It's just like, nope, heal 2 right now.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the fact that it combos with cards you were gonna play anyway is sweet.
Yep.
Like you just get added benefit on top of it. Pretty nice. Yeah. And maybe you're playing with Daisy and Daisy eats a grasping hands or something like that. Emergency Aid pulls her out of the brink.
Exactly.
So how would we rate this one?
I'm gonna give this one a 0 as well. I think this one's okay. It's not +1 territory. I don't think it makes your deck better per se, but if you're playing around with Daisy and you happen to be playing B-Cop and or Guard Dog, this is a solid pickup.
I still think it's action full healings, which kind of limits it to like elder thing, I'd say.
Huh.
I like it over first aid. I like it over If It Bleeds, but I mean, it just does what it says it does, but it's still action full. And
I think for me, what saves it is that you can heal your B cop and your guard
Oh,
dog.
right. Yeah, if you're healing beat cops and guard dogs, yeah, there's actually like a nice proactive use for it. Nice
Yeah,
proactive and synergistic use. That's true. That's true.
'cause
I'm still gonna go Elder Thing though, because you can do better. You know you can. Just play another guard dog.
I'm going to give this one a 0, largely because this is one of the only cards we have at this stage that heals allies. And I can't, like,
True.
if I
True.
don't like I don't like first aid, like I would rate first aid, say, as an Elder Thing or even a Tentacle. I can't remember what I gave it back in our core set reviews, but first aid is limited to investigators. This one at least gives you the option of allies, which I think is valuable, especially for Guardians who have 2 good allies in the revised core, and then they can pick up, say, Brother Xavier in this one if they want to keep that willpower skill icon on the table. They can heal him if they don't want him to detonate and kill everything on the table or kill something on the table. I don't know how often I end up playing this card, but I do kind of like the fact that it exists and that it does give you a way to heal an ally. So certainly I like this a lot better than If It Bleeds, for that fact.
Man, look at you, up on healing, Mr. Lang.
I know. I'm turning over a new leaf, I guess.
Yeah. Whew.
The final card that we're going to look at in this batch of reviews is Prepared for the Worst. 1 cost event, intellect and combat skill icons, tactic trait. Search the top 9 cards of your deck for a weapon asset and add it to your hand. Shuffle your deck. So this card is, I don't want to say it's an auto-include in a lot of Guardians, but it is a definite one-of in a lot of Guardians, simply because if you draw your opening hand and you don't find a weapon, searching roughly a third of your deck is a very good way of finding one in a hurry. It does take an action to do, so you have to take the action, find the weapon, then take another action to play the weapon. So it's not exactly fast in that respect, but if you need a weapon in a hurry or you have your eyes on a particular weapon, say one of the upgrades that you pick up with your experience points, this thing will generally find it for you. The tactic trait becomes relevant down the road once Stick to the Plan comes out in the Path to Carcosa box later this summer. I guess the only really bad things, but there's not many bad things to say about this card. I mean, it does what it does. I guess the only thing is that it only targets weapons, so you can't fetch items with this that don't have the weapon trait. And when it whiffs, it feels awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the worst feelings in the world, and seems to happen with an alarming frequency.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I've like almost stopped playing this card simply because every time I play it, it whiffs. I don't know what it is with my luck, man, but it is awful. I'll play like 5 weapons. You know, I give myself a reasonable chance to find one in the top 9. No, never. Never. Every time I play it.
You're just gonna have to shuffle better, Nate. just
I
we
know.
gotta start. We gotta enroll you in some sleight of hand courses, so you can learn how to shuffle better.
To be fair though, Nate, you also draw like a half dozen auto fails per game. So
once again, I think some sleight of hand courses would be good for you. Like, oh, I'm gonna go release. Is it an auto? Oh, look, it's another sign.
Oh, what are the chances?
Whoa! Yeah, that's gonna solve all your problems. Yeah. So personally, I think the real power of Prepared for the Worst comes with XP cards, particularly like a really big gun, like a lightning gun, because it's almost as if Prepared for the Worst gets better the more XP you spend on your weapons, because Prepared for the Worst will suddenly start finding stronger and stronger weapons. And I think that's the real power for it. If it's not ubiquitous, it's definitely like a consistent presence in most Guardian decks, at least as a single copy. Yeah, it's very solid. It's also really good early in the campaign when you only have like two weapons that you want. So you play 2 copies of each, and then you go, I want to make sure I have them because I'm rolling banks and I need to have weapons to kill things. So you play prepared for the worst to make sure you grab your machete and your 45 automatic. Kind of smooths everything out. So it's good.
It does what it does. It provides your deck with consistency, which is one of the things that you absolutely need in this game, because you really need to hit the ground running. You know, if you don't find your weapon early, your Seeker draws that enemy and they just kind of sit there and die while you struggle to find your weapon.
Yeah, a lot of the time this is going to be sort of your 6th weapon in the deck. That it's obviously slower than the other 5, but if you say run a gun, I think this might have been actually played a lot more during sort of the revised core Dunwich Legacy, because there just weren't a lot of options in terms of weapons. So if you were playing, say, 2 machetes, 2 45s, I mean, outside of that, the quality of the weapons drops off precipitously, as we have seen with Blackjack and things like Knife, where you don't really want to be packing those. So this arrives on the scene at just the right time where you can find those weapons. And it does obviously get better, like you said, Mattastrophic, when you start to upgrade those weapons into bigger and badder guns and knives and whatnot. So or the lightning gun, which is in the Dunwich Legacy. Finding that lightning gun quickly is very good, especially, and I think this one also works well if you have guns. So because most guns have limited ammo, especially at the beginning of the campaign, before you have had a chance to pick up extra ammunition from the revised core set, my gun is empty, I need something in a hurry, prepared for the worst sort of fills that void until you can get the extra ammo to find another weapon quickly. How would we rate this one?
This is a very solid +1 staple card. I mean, if you're playing Stick to the Plan, this is one of the 3 cards on Stick to the Plan. And within the confines of just the core and Dunwich, you know, there just aren't a lot of good weapons, and having this card find what little good weapons you do have is really, really helpful and really critical. You know, unlike Blackjack, this card actually solves a problem the Guardian class had, which was finding their weapons.
Yeah, which is what happens when they don't draw their weapons. That's true. Yeah, I'd also give this one a +1. Its only downside is that, you know, if you've already found your big gun, it kind of turns off. It doesn't have good icons. So it can be a dead draw if you've already found the weapon. But yeah, in the core Dunwich Legacy environment, it's very, very good. I also like it a lot in Skids, because he has his own way of kind of negating the action loss, you know, with his ability. You know, it's like he plays prepared for the worst. He grabs his his Derringer, but because he skids, he's going to get more actions per game. So the fact that prepared for the worst costs an action is less of a thing, is less of a problem for Skids. It's also worth noting that both Zoe Samaras and Roland Banks are very focused on killing enemies, or, you know, so they need their guns.
This one gets a +1 from me as well. Usually I play at least 1 copy, just sort of as an emergency button in case I haven't drawn either one in my opening hand, or something, I've run out of ammo or something like that. I'm always happy to see prepared for the worst in that case. I agree with you, Mattastrophic, that the icons on this one aren't particularly good, and I think that's the case with a lot of the cards in the Dunwich Legacy. They were still tweaking at this stage of the game, like, what icons do we put on these cards? You've got cards like Evidence that have 2 of one kind, and generally those are better than a lot of these cards where you end up with 1 in 1. And while, like, if you think of the card from a thematic standpoint, like prepared for the worst, what icons should it have? Well, it should have combat and intellect. That's a good combination from a thematic standpoint. But from an actual playing the game standpoint, they feel like they come up short a lot of the time. And it's just like, well, I need to commit something, but I wish I had something a little more meaty. So if you're really concerned about the icons, make sure you pack enough skills, because those are those are really your ticket at this stage of the game. That's going to do it for our look at the first batch of Guardian cards in the Dunwich Legacy. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them in the comments down below, and we will do our best to answer them. Any final thoughts about these this first batch?
These feel like a very natural extension of the core set box. Very straightforward cards that, in some cases more than others, solve problems that were apparent within the Guardian card pool, and in the case of Prepare for the Worst, it does a pretty good job at that. Blackjack, not so much.
Yeah, and it is. I do admit, even though I rated them very badly, I do appreciate that there is a horror healing and a damage healing card both in this box at level 0. That's nice. Even though the cards I don't think are very good, it's nice that the Guardians received both of them, so you can kind of target your problem.
That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.